My name is Kathryn Overberg. I work in Beard Shear, and I'm part of the Office of University Counsel. So there's 4 lawyers sitting up on the 3rd floor of Beard Shear. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what our office does and what some other offices, namely in Beard Shear, but a lot of resource places for you as ISU employees. Some of you may have already encountered some issues and found these places on your own. But we have so many offices and web resources for our employees. And it's difficult to get you in a captive audience sometime to make sure you know all about them. So I'm going to cover some. Elaine's going to cover the role of her office, and then we'd be glad to take any questions. So first, what we've got is my office, which is the Office of University Counsel. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do and what we don't do. We used to be called Legal Services, and for a long time that made people think we were there for their own individual legal services. And that would be in the what we don't do category. The university is our client. And so whenever somebody, the university itself, whenever an officer, a supervisor is acting in their capacity of representing the university, then we would be working with them as our client. So our client can shift from somebody in the president's office to somebody in extension, depending on what role they're doing. So if somebody wants to sue the university, I'm not their lawyer. But if somebody gets sued at the university, then I can help them in that matter. So it is sometimes difficult to decide who's your client today. It might be a little different tomorrow, depending on the facts. So we do get calls from employees, from students, and from the public asking if we can represent them in legal matters. And so we don't represent employees, we don't represent students. Students do have a separately funded legal office in case do any of you ever work with students? Raise your hands. Because a couple of the resources I'm going to talk about are involving students too. So students do have a separate office on campus if they get into landlord-tenant problems with their apartments, if they get into criminal trouble. We would wish that wouldn't happen, but there is an office for them on campus, but it's not our office. So what we do is represent the university, we represent the officers and those people who are carrying out the university's duties, but no personal legal advice. If you're going through a divorce or a foreclosure, that's not us. We can help you maybe give you a list of some lawyers. And specifically, if you're looking to sue someone at the university, it's not us. That would be a conflict of interest for us to tell you how to sue our own clients. So again, we might give you a list of other people that you could contact because there are a wealth of wonderful lawyers in Ames, Story County, and down in Polk County, which is where I used to work. I used to be a trial lawyer before I came here about 10 years ago. Extension can be a little difficult sometimes. When I work with Don or Kayla, I sometimes have to figure out, again, who's my client here? Are we talking about a county issue or are we talking about an Iowa State issue? So if you're ever working with Don or Kayla or one of the Reeds and you're working with our office, you're going to hear some rather simple questions like, who is the person and are they our employee? But I always have to know if the people that we're talking to or the people we're giving advice to are Iowa State employees, because then yes, I'm likely their counsel. But the county is a separate legal entity from us. And most of you know that sounds very simple, but that's where it can get very confusing from a legal standpoint is I'm not their lawyer unless their county specifically were to retain me. So let's say they had a civil rights complaint come in, it was kind of murky whether it was Iowa State or the county. They might go to one of their meetings and make a motion to let me represent both parties. But otherwise, I'm not a county attorney. And so you're going to get some questions anytime you're working with our legal office. Who is the client? Who are we talking about? Is it a county issue or is it Iowa State? If it's a county issue, we're often going to have to push back. You're going to have to go back to the council and they're going to have to use their own attorney to deal with the matter. Most of them are becoming much more well-versed in that over the last several years, so they're not going to be so surprised if that comes up, is that for real estate matters, for employment matters, they know they need to talk to their own lawyer, and most of them have a lawyer in their county or on their council who's going to do their work. So that's something you may run into when you talk to our office. How to contact our office, what works best for extension is that you go through Don or Kayla, or if you're working with one of the Reeds, you go through them rather than calling our office directly, because there's so many of those fine details that we need to get figured out before we can decide whether we can even talk. Again, are you our client? It's much better if you go through Central or HR and Extension or go through your Reed. So that's how they'd prefer to contact our office. And if in a department, if your ISU department, your ISU office needed to hire a lawyer, sounds exciting, our office can help you do that. The Board of Regents controls whether we can hire outside counsel. We just can't run around and hire our own lawyers all over the campus. We have to go through a special procedure. So if you're acquiring property, if you have some negotiation that's going on where you do need to hire a special attorney and it's some area that maybe I don't practice in, you'd need to come to our office through Dawn and we would help you make those arrangements. Any questions about what the legal office does at Iowa State? All right, it's exciting stuff. If I think that little xylophone is exciting, it's exciting stuff. So these are some of the resources. When Don asked me to present on ISU resources, these are the ones that I tend to work with the most, and I have to give you a little caveat on what I do the most at Iowa State, is I tend to work with our people, our employees, our good actors, our bad actors, people who are being rewarded and people who are being disciplined, the whole gamut of it. So a lot of these resources are geared towards some of the people side of things, the good, the bad, the ugly, and places you might go. I heard HR was talking to you earlier, and so some of it might overlap a little bit. I apologize, but if you have questions about any of it, just raise your hand. So the first is resource that is fantastic, and I'm glad that I've been here to see this evolve, is the policy library. I think Kayla was mentioning this to you at the end of your last session. This is a starting point for me anytime somebody's talking about an ISU policy, because there can always be more policies than you think. Part of my job is to know ISU policies, and there's always some little nook and cranny that no one's looked at for 15 years. But the policy library is where I can start. You guys also have the benefit of your extension HR as a nice collection of policies. Some of your policies differ, but that policy library is a great place to understand what the university has adopted. A great example is our discrimination and harassment policy. 10 years ago, you would find that published in paper 50 different places. It would be in a faculty handbook, it would be in a P&S handbook, it would be taped on a wall or a bulletin board, and it would just be kind of published all over. Well, what happened when the Office of Equal Opportunity changed a word or two? Did it always make it to all those places to get the change? No, it was very difficult, and that's just one example, but a good one of how a policy has a lot of breadth, and it was hanging out in a lot of different policy handbooks. It was impossible to try to keep up with all those changes, make sure we weren't looking at 3 different policies. So the policy library was a great solution to that. It's the one-stop shopping for the university policy. So you may have discrimination and harassment there, and that is the guiding policy on discrimination and harassment. A department may adopt a policy statement, a short one, or a procedure to supplement, but it's not going to be different. It can't contradict or have a separate procedure. But that's where your policy library is really going to be helpful. Plus, you've got the benefit of having your extension place. So that should be your first stop, is when you're having a personnel problem or you need to know about leave or anything, is what can I find quickly on the web myself? Because my guess is you're going to find a lot of what you need either in the policy library or on the extension HR page, is that we've got everything published. It should be easy to find. And then if there's new supplemental information, your department, your office may have additional information. The example on the faculty side is we have the faculty handbook, which is a university policy, and then a department or a college might adopt additional procedures for promotion and tenure, for example. Not contradictory, just additional to give more information. So your one-stop shop should be the policy library to find any of the policies regarding your status as an employee, your status as a supervisor, whether you can smoke on campus, whether you can have a C&I dog, everything is going to be there, or else we're going to find you the right resource to answer your question. Human Resource Services, I don't want to duplicate a lot of what you heard before, so I didn't hear the whole thing, but give me a signal if I'm just repeating what you just heard. But Human Resources is one of my main clients. It's where I work with the employees who are undergoing performance problems. It's where I work with supervisors who are trying to unveil new expectations for their employees. So I work very closely with HR about on a daily, several times a week. I talk with Don and Kayla too on extension HR matters when they make their way through them as well. So you've got to know that we're asking more and more of our employees and of our supervisors, but we don't want to send you out there without the right tools. And HR is going to be one of those great places to find those tools, either central HR or extension HR. So performance management is one of the greatest tools we've got here to make sure we all know what our expectations are. If I'm not meeting my boss's expectations, I should be told that, shouldn't I? Either in an evaluation or some communication. We have policies and procedures on performance management, and that's where you can find a lot of those tools. So if you're a supervisor and you're struggling with how to manage someone's performance, you can contact Don, you can work with Central HR. How do I do this? If you're an employee and you're being told your performance is not acceptable, you might not know what your rights are. You might not know what you can do with that information. Again, Extension HR and Central HR are great places to reach out. They're not just there for one party only. They want to make sure everybody knows what's available to you, how can you get out of this situation in the right position to continue your employment. So performance management is a big one. Policy questions, if you don't know what a policy says, so let's say you went to the policy library, you found the policy and you said, I have no idea. Clear as mud, I don't know what you're saying. Call HR. One of your HR representatives can help you through the policy interpretation. Here's what the university practice has been, because despite best efforts, sometimes a policy isn't as clear as maybe the author had intended. So ask. If you don't know what it says, ask somebody. And that's another great role of HR, is to tell you how our policies are implemented and looking for consistency, what you can expect in a procedure if you're facing discipline or if you're trying to discipline an employee. Workers' compensation, I probably touched on that when Andrea was here. That's also where workers' compensation claims would be filed. That could be another place that's a little tricky about whose employee is it. It depends on who gets hurt. So if you don't know, call Don and Kayla or Central HR. If it's a county issue, it's one of your employees in a county office, whose work was it? No idea. Call and ask. Let's make sure we're following the right procedures. But workers' compensation for ISU employees would be covered in human resources and all the procedures that an employee who's injured would follow, including the supervisor. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, is going to be monitored through Central Human Resources in Beardshire. And that's a process that we formalized probably in 2005, I want to say. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, says that employees who are otherwise able to do their job can ask for accommodations. If my health or my mental state are preventing me from completing my job, I need some assistance through a computer device or a different work setting, a lot of different accommodations that are out there. HR is the place to centralize that. It used to be departments kind of did it on their own, and it's very difficult to have consistency there and fairness if HR couldn't help. They're the ones with the expertise in how to apply that law and how to apply accommodations. So if you need accommodations to do your job due to a physical or a mental impairment, or you've got an employee that needs some assistance doing their job, please work with HR early. It's a very interactive process. So let's say I would like a fancy new computer device because of my hearing problem, and there's only this one expensive, really cool device that I'd like. My supervisor might work with HR and they'd say, okay, we've got the documentation in, because I'm going to have to provide some documentation. But there's another device that is going to be equally effective, and we'd like you to try that, or we'd like your input on whether that would work. So I don't get to name my accommodation and say, that's it, that's the only thing, you must give it to me. It's an interactive process where the department and the employee should go back and forth to find something that works for both of them. It needs to be effective. A good example might be a tape recorder might record meetings just as well as that fancy computer software. As long as the tape recorder is effective, it's certainly not as attractive or cool, but if it's effective, then that's my accommodation. I can choose not to use it, but they don't have to give me that fancy device if there's another device that works. So keep in mind, that's why it's got to be interactive, though. If either the employee or the supervisor shut down, make up their minds without going to HR, it can get very difficult for both, especially the employee who's trying to get their job done, and the supervisor is trying to hold the employee accountable, and they're at an impasse. So HR can often help with that impasse. Family Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, maybe some of you saw me during orientation or acclimation recently, if you're all new employees, and that's where we talk initially about FMLA. And as ISU employees, you're covered, and that's the law that says you get to take time off for a health condition of your own, of your immediate family members. If somebody has a baby, you or your partner, or you adopt a baby, there's a lot of reasons you might take FMLA. You guys are covered. Some folks in the county are not going to be covered, so it's very important that you get your facts right by starting with Don or Kayla about who's covered, am I covered, do I get to take this right? You got to work a year before you're eligible, but after that, most employees are going to be eligible as ISU employees, but the counties are a little different because they're technically not big enough under the law to be covered. So it can get real tricky real quickly if you need time off or you have an employee under you that needs time off. Please work with HR because it can get very confusing and complicated. that tracking those absences and doing the work from home if you're not getting the help of somebody who deals with it every day. So that's another great role that Extension HR and Central HR can handle. And the ugly part, the disciplinary actions. Yes, HR is going to be the office that would help. You know, a lot of times there's a difference between corrective action and disciplinary action. Corrective action is where we're trying to get the employee to turn it around. So maybe it's performance, maybe it's behavior or conduct, but turn it around. We're giving you a chance to fix this. You know, either get to work on time or get these duties done. Those are the types of things you might have with corrective action. Discipline might just be straight up bad performance, misconduct, insubordination, not coming to work on time. And yes, HR would help a supervisor through that. But the goal at ISU, like at most bigger employers, is not to have a lot of turnover. It's not good for anybody to just turn those employees over. We'd like to rehabilitate, turn things around for you and the supervisor so the department can get their work done. So HR is there to help both Extension HR and Central HR. Equal opportunity and compliance is another one of my major clients that I work with, again, up on the 3rd floor in Beardshire. And this is the office that primarily handles the discrimination and harassment policy. So that's true for students, for faculty, staff. All of us are protected from our discrimination policy that says we can't be discriminated against based on a protected class. We can't be harassed sexually, racially because of a protected class. And so EO is that place. If you get a complaint, if somebody comes to you, let's say about sexual harassment, the policy says you need to let equal opportunity know. And that is what you absolutely want to do. You want to pass it on to the office whose job it is to handle it. Because most of you are probably not trained in what to do in that situation. You can read the policy, which is a great start, but you would really like to get it to the office that handles it all the time. And that's what the policy would say is anytime you get a complaint, and whether it's in writing or verbal, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. 20 years ago, we might have said if it's not signed and in writing with the blood stamp there, it's not a complaint. Those days are gone. A complaint is a complaint as soon as you know about it. So if you're put on notice of harassment or discrimination, you're going to want to call Equal Opportunity. You might want to touch base with Don and Kayla too to coordinate your efforts there so there's nothing duplicative there. But they're an important office. They're an enforcement office. That's where the compliance comes from. They're going to do a lot of training and education. It'd be great if in your area you had EO could come in and talk a little bit more about their policies, because it's great that everybody knows what they're protected from. Everybody knows what's expected of them about bad behavior, about email usage, forwarding on bad jokes, screensavers, bad joke things, verbal jokes. It's, you know, it's amazing what some people still think is acceptable in the workplace, and it's not. So we'd like to get off on the right foot. So keep in mind that Equal Opportunity is a great resource if you've just got questions, if you've got concerns. We have assisters on campus. Those are folks who are specifically trained on that policy. That's not who's going to investigate a complaint, but they can kind of act like a traffic cop. Here's what you could do. You could go here, you could go there. So if you've ever got a concern, the assisters are another place connected with the EO office. Training is another big part of what they're going to do. Risk management, I threw this in here because a lot of you in the extension role might be offering those outreach programs, and risk management has a role to play. And hopefully they're at the table at some of these events that you're coordinating or camps. We've got a lot of new policies on youth on campus and youth camp policies, and I see some head nods out there. You know, it's just a more regulated area, and so it's good to have risk management at the table. Do you need insurance for this event that you're planning? Do you have the right policies in place? Can your employees work at that event? A lot of questions to ask on the early side of planning. So if you are involved in outreach, and you are going to be inviting people on campus or sending people elsewhere, it's really a good idea to touch base with Don and Kayla to see if risk management should be at that table, because they can help you out. They do it every day. Again, they're the expert. For me to sit and plan an event, I wouldn't know what insurance policy I needed, but they do it every day, and so they can help you plan. It's better to do that ahead of time than to wait until the end and they're coming and saying, you're doing what tomorrow, when, with who? And they're going to be running around. Much better if you can use them as a resource in planning your events, and it'll go much smoother. Senior Vice President and Provost Office. So this is another client that I work with a lot, and it's a great resource for faculty. It's a great resource for research misconduct or research ideas. A lot of our faculty and staff are being asked to be more entrepreneurial. How can we generate external funds? How can we develop more ideas, more research ideas for the university to be self-sustaining? And a lot of the offices within the Senior Vice President and Provost Office are a great place to go. Again, resources for planning, not waiting until the last minute and when somebody's going to say, by the way, you didn't do these things. But there's great resource there. If you are faculty or you work with faculty, Dawn Bratch Prince in that office is another great resource for options available to you in work structure, going part-time tenure, leaves of absence. It's just you can go to their webpage and find a lot of their resources too. So I'd encourage you, if you are faculty or you work with faculty, to use the Provost Office for all that it offers, because it's got so much out there. That's where the advanced grant is administered through, our STEM programs for women and minorities. So a lot of that comes out of the Provost Office. One that I didn't put up that I mentioned earlier was for students. For any of you that work with students, the Dean of Students Office is a very underutilized, if you ask me, underutilized resource. There's the two branches that I work with the most are, again, because I deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly, the Judicial Office. So that's where students are sent when they plagiarize, when they commit misconduct or assaults, things like that. But over on the other side of the hall is Student Services, and that's where there's a lot of outreach for our students who are struggling, either mental health, drugs and alcohol. They might be the victim of a sexual assault, and they do fantastic outreach. And they're part of our programs for sexual assault victims in Story County. We have a fantastic response team in Story County, and student assistance is part of that as well. So if you work with students and you learn that one of them is undergoing some of these crisis situations, either they're a victim of something or they're having mental health problems, you can do an outreach to Student Services in the Dean of Students Office, and they can very delicately and wonderfully reach out to that student and see if they can't get them the resources they need. A specific policy that office would administer would be the sexual misconduct policy, and that's when it says that if you encounter a student that has been raped or sexually assaulted, you're supposed to let the Dean of Students know. You might not have her name, you might not be able to release his or her name, the victim, but the Dean of Students Office needs to know that it occurred so that we can try to get the right resources out to the people involved. We might already have heard about it, but if people don't report it, there's a good chance we're never going to get the resources out to the victim and see if discipline needs to occur for the offender. So keep that in mind for those of you that do work with students. The sexual misconduct policy, which you can find online, keep that in mind there. What I would like to sum up with on the HR resources is, and I tell this to department chairs all the time, are the 3 Ps, and it's really official and legal sounding, the 3 Ps. But if you follow the 3 Ps, you're really going to be in good shape. You're first going to look and see, is there a policy? Is there a policy for what I need or what I'm about to do? Go find it, look at it. Is there a process for what I need? Because we want to follow our processes. We don't want to be acting arbitrarily outside of them. If we have a process, we should follow it. And who are the players? Who can help me through this process? Is it EO? Is it the Provost Office? So keep in mind there's the 3 Ps. If you can follow that, you're going to be in good shape. And a lot of times your players are going to be Don or Kayla. They might be Central HR. They might be EO. But if that's your mantra and that's all you remember about what Kathryn said as she stood up here, then that's good and I've done my work. Policy, process, and players.